This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hi, this is Benjamin from the UK true crime podcast They Walk Among Us. Brought to you by AMC Networks, Shudder is a premium streaming experience that provides a multi-sensory dive into fantastical worlds, offering the very best of old and new horror. Discover films and series that covers the entire horror spectrum, including highly anticipated new releases like The Boy Behind the Door and Psycho Gorman, to giants of the horror genre like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. What's more, you can watch one of my all-time favourite films, Mandy, a spiralling, surreal, bloody journey of revenge with visuals that are simply mind-blowing. Exceptional originals, movies, TV series and live events, there's always something new and unexpected for Shudder members to experience. Sign up at shudder.com.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
I shall astonish the world all at once, wrote our great life today. For I hate piddling, you know. And he did astonish the world. The man who said that is our great life, and the big news is that we're out of the studio today and we're meeting our guest outside a brick-built, grandish-looking house in Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire. This is Etruria Hall, once the home of Josiah Wedgwood, the royal potter, or as he put it himself, vase-maker general to the universe. And who has just joined us but another giant figure, Tristram Hunt, former MP for Stoke Central and now director of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Tell us about this man, Tristram. Why do you think he's so important?
Josiah Wedgwood is this phenomenal figure at the epicentre of the story of design in this country. He's a transformational individual. When Britain enters onto the world stage, when you have this divergence between the fortunes of Britain and Europe, India and China, and all of this is bound up in ceramics and pottery. And the figure who I always think he reminds me of is Steve Jobs, the man behind the iPhone, publishing a whole range of ways in which we interact with the world. But crucially, what he did was to connect design and industry. And that's what Wedgwood does, the combination of design and industry.
What did he look like?
Wedgwood was a big figure with a peg leg. Wedgwood lost his leg, and so he had a stick. So he's a big, hobbling, energetic figure.
I can't help noticing that his house, which once had a butler, footman, coachman, gardener and all the rest, is now overshadowed by a hotel. The bit I'm looking at might even be the annex. What happened to Wedgwood's business? How was it doing when you became the local MP in 2010?
It was at this terrible moment of collapse that, having been this hugely successful industry, having transformed the manufacture of ceramics, not only in Britain but right around the world, when I was elected into Parliament in 2010, Wedgwood had gone into administration. What was then Waterford Wedgwood Royal Doulton was on its knees. And that's one of the tragedies. This part of North Staffordshire was built on pits and pots. The coal mines were not far away. All of that had fallen off a cliff. Wedgwood rises to power in the mid-18th century by taking on China at the production of China. That he takes away the leadership in ceramics from China and brings it to the UK. When I became a Member of Parliament here, what had happened is that China had claimed that back again. And communities like Stoke-on-Trent in North Staffordshire felt the riptide of that, like few other places in the UK.
You've written a book about him called The Radical Potter. Why do you call him radical?
He is a pivotal point in that pathway to the Industrial Revolution. That makes him radical. But also, for me, his politics are radical. He had a radical critique of Britain. He was a supporter of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the campaign against slavery. So his politics were radical, and he had this radical impact upon British industrialisation.
We're moving to somewhere quieter now, and while we do, here's an extract from a previous biography of Wedgwood written in 2004 by Brian Dolan and read here by James Masters.
A month before his 9th birthday, Josiah Wedgwood with his mother Mary and her 8 children, stood against brisk winds in the graveyard of Burslem Church at his father's funeral. The countryside here in the north part of Staffordshire ripples with hills and valleys, often windswept and scraped by heavy, steely clouds. Josiah Wedgwood's great-great-grandfather, Gilbert, was born in 1588, with ambition, energy, talent and charm, and the self-confidence to make the most of the kind of life he was given. And that life revolved around pottery. A few locals had begun working with clay, which they dug, and when the sun was out, they dried in sunpans. This they would then form with their hands into coarse vessels for butter and beer, useful things for the farmers. Gilbert learnt from these workers that the process involved exploring dense woods and rocky ridges to seek out the clay, prodding the gouty, moorish, peaty black land. In time, Gilbert became one of the best. He was the first Wedgwood to be called a master potter.
So Josiah is one of 12 children born to Thomas and Mary Wedgwood. His father was potter and his father's father was a potter, and so it goes back. And the Wedgwoods had done fairly well by the mid-18th century. They were well known in Burslem, the mother town of the potteries, where they owned land, they owned pot banks and kilns across the town. And Wedgwood grows up really, I think, inheriting something powerful through his mother's line, because his mother's father was a Unitarian minister. And that nonconformist vision of questioning, of experimentation, of seeking to learn and challenge, that's what I think Josiah inherits as a young man.
He was terribly ill as a boy.
The key moment is the advent of smallpox in his early teens, and the after effects of it damages his leg. This is the key moment, because Wedgwood cannot then be a thrower. He cannot use the tread on the wheel in order to shape the pots for himself. He has to think of another way of working in the pottery industry, and he becomes a designer, he becomes a thinker, he becomes a visionary about ceramics. This illness puts his energies in making ceramics in a different direction.
For weeks, Josiah lay in bed, fading into delirium. His skin became itchy and burned as the spreading rash raised and filled with pus, which after erupting left pockmarks on his skin. Finally, the fever broke, and he began to move.
I've been interested in many of the great lives that we've covered in the correspondence between childhood illness and the emergence of some kind of genius. Did you recognise that in him?
Very much so. There's this moment where he cannot continue in the industry in the same manner as his brothers or cousins. And Gladstone says he sort of goes into his bedroom and thinks about the world and comes out saying, well, I'm going to have to be a designer. I don't think it was as dramatic as that, but there is a moment of change because he has to change because of this disability.
Hitting a brick wall can be quite useful.
Enormously useful. And in a sense, what his leg couldn't do, his brain now has to do. And it's that design innovation which is going to be so transformational.
We've moved now to one of Wedgwood's later rivals, Royal Stafford, to talk to the company's managing director, Norman Tempest. Norman, from your own perspective, tell us about how Josiah Wedgwood is remembered in Stoke today. What do people think? What do they know about him?
It's quite a difficult question because I decided I'd talk to a few of the local kids. And I've got to say it was quite a negative response. He was one of the names that came up, but they know the name along with all the other great pottery names like Dalton and Spode, and there's no special emphasis or focus. My generation think of Wedgwood as the father of the English potteries, but he's just one of... You've got to ask the question how important pottery is in Stoke. He's definitely remembered, but you know the statue's there. It's the first thing you see when you get off the train. It's quite often decorated with a Stoke scarf, Portland vase in one, carling in the other.
And do you think that the people of Stoke-on-Trent the 6 towns.
6 towns, careful.
I'm well corrected. Do you think there is some sense, even if people don't know a lot about Wedgwood, some sense of a fall from glory?
Sadly, I've got to say yes. I think I remember very vividly when Wedgwood went under. It employed families, so it was mother, father, sister, brother, aunties, uncles. It wasn't just one person being made redundant, it was a whole family. People were very, very happy working there. But it's tinged with a bitterness how it ended.
What was new in his approach to manufacturing?
He brought it all onto one site. You know, everybody credits Ford for the production line, but Wedgwood created a production line. Pottery is very much a hand-to-hand business. It's a chain. You know, the clay man makes it, he hands it on to the sponger hands it on to the kiln man fires it, he then hands it on to the decorators. So up until then, each process had been in, they used to call them shops, probably a separate building. It might not have even been on the same site. What Wedgwood did, he basically aligned it all up. So raw materials came in one end and the finished goods came out the other and went onto the barge, which was conveniently parked outside.
But we're sitting here, aren't we, Norman, in one of this was where his cousins, this was where Long John Wedgwood...
Long John and Thomas.
Long John and Thomas made pottery here,
yeah.
And then over the road is the big house they bought with the profits.
That's right. I'd find it hard to criticise anything that he did. What about you, Tristan?
I think the criticism would be, in a sense, his great achievement as well, which was the production and just the volume of production. And he takes this kind of ecology of small potteries and pot banks and creates a Truro as a factory, and out of that grows this, incredible volume. But he always had this idea of, turning men into machines. So a bit of that kind of wanting to eliminate some of the creativity with Wedgwood. Do you ever feel that?
Yeah, and I understand it because to survive in the industry, it is a repetitive process. And people who work on this factory go to the machine and they work there all day. And you mustn't lose sight that it's a very physical job. If you're making plates, you've got a mould that probably weighs a couple of kilos. You've got a slab of clay on top of it. And the guy's going to handle that 1,500 times in a day.
So he turned men into machines. But he himself was a thoroughly human, anything but robotic character. And I want to ask a little bit about his personal life. Before I do, we've got a quick clip, and this is what the clip will say.
That Josiah was still a bachelor at 33 was not remarkable. Remaining single was good for business. But in addition, the woman he regarded as the love of his life, his cousin Sally, was from a very different station in life. She was rich. Sally's father would allow them to marry, he declared, but only when, or if, Josiah could offer him £4,000 jointure money.
Well, Josiah married his cousin, and he was very excited about getting married because his great friend Thomas Bentley had told him all the wonders that come with the marriage bed. And so this was a moment of great excitement and joy for him. But he had to drive a hard bargain because in the 18th century, there was this terrible fear of women being seduced and all of their money going away. And so Sally's father, Richard, drove a hard bargain. But it was a joyous marriage, and it also, crucially, brought with it really substantial funds.
About 2 million in today's money.
More than that, I think.
That's a good marriage.
That's a good marriage.
It's a very good marriage. So it brought happiness, money, and children. It was the holy trinity of marriage.
How about you, Norman? What drew you into this?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me about my marriage then.
Heaven forbid.
Well, actually, my wife for 20-odd years was a potter as well, so it runs in the family.
May I quote, Tristram, from your own book? From teapots and cups, Wedgwood's new coloured glazing techniques extended into the production of pickle dishes, dessert services, sauce boats, plates, snuff boxes and ceramic handles for cutlery. The growing consumer market, nurtured by what he called the industrious revolution, with its unquenchable thirst for tea, coffee and chocolate, had found the perfect supplier. Now, he didn't do this all on his own, did he?
No, his great partner was the Liverpool merchant Thomas Bentley. This more sophisticated, more worldly individual. And Bentley could do the needful, as they like to say, with the great aristocratic patrons. He was very helpful in making Wedgwood move from some of his early Rococo designs towards neoclassicism. And that provides the basis for the success of Jasper and the Jasper designs. So Bentley is this wonderful figure who, and again, there are these great letters where he has to say to Bentley, I'm going to have to stop writing to you because I do actually need to talk to my wife now. And Bentley is the only person who is in competition for his affections at the same level.
I'd never gathered that. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
I've actually got the letter that you remember, Tristram. It starts, Dear Mr. Bentley, this is from Wedgwood, Dear Mr. Bentley, I have stolen a few moments from my wife this morning to converse with my friend. Lovely stuff.
Newcastle, Monday morning, before sunrising, November 1765. Dear Mr. Bentley, I have stole a few moments from my wife this morning to converse a little with my friend till the world is wide awake, for then I must of necessity mix with the bustling crowd. Everything is in the most violent agitation here. By everything, you know I now mean navigation. My health is now perfect.
The two men, Bentley and Wedgwood, collaborated on the building of a canal, the Trent with the Mersey. 93 miles of canal skirting the Peak District to be cut, 23 miles of branch lines and 76 locks. Estimated cost 300,000, which must be vastly magnified in today's money. As an investment, the canal was a nightmare, wasn't it?
It was incredibly expensive, and you would need the big figures. You would need the Bridgewaters and the Gowers and the big families to get behind it, as they did, because what all the big aristocratic families wanted to do was get their coal from their lands up towards Manchester, up towards the industrialising cities elsewhere. But Wedgwood understood that a canal would not only make the import of the clay from the West Country cheaper coming down to the potteries, but it also meant that the export of their ware up to Liverpool and then around the world, the price there would fall markedly, and you'd also not have so much of it broken.
I have in my notes the phrase the frog service and Catherine the Great. It's piqued my curiosity. Can either of you tell me about this?
Actually, it was a great piece of marketing. I'm trying to think the history of why they had the frogs. It was
the frogs were the fact that where the ware was destined for, the palace it was destined for, was surrounded by marshes full of frogs.
But it was the views of sort of stately homes, and this was a great piece of marketing because, you see, they'd go to Tristram's mansion and say, do you mind if our artist comes and paints your mansion, Tristram? And he'd say, oh, yeah, go ahead. And then, of course, afterwards, Tristram would have to buy some of the plates because it's got his house on it.
And then suddenly everyone wanted everyone wanted their house on it. And so to begin with, they were scared they wouldn't get any views or they wouldn't get any access. But as soon as the kind of spirit of emulation grew, then everyone wanted that.
And he did a great one because he locked it up in the showroom for 2 years, didn't deliver it, and sold tickets to come and see it.
The frantic months of extensive travelling and long days supervising the works had meant that he had overwalked and overworked my knee. This return of my complaint sunk my spirits, he wrote. The pain in his knee was acute, and Dr. James Bent, a local physician, prescribed an emetic to cause vomiting, hoping it might release some of the rotten bile irritating his leg. By May 1768, Josiah knew there was only one solution. It was time to have the leg removed.
He had his leg amputated, as we've said, below the knee. It never seemed to set him back, but it must have created an extraordinary impression of this giant of a man with a wooden leg.
We have these accounts of the staircase in Etruria, in the factory, the wooden staircase going up to his office, with this indentation in it because of the crash of Wedgwood's peg leg onto the wooden steps. And then these accounts of him walking through the pot bank with his cane, with his walking stick, smashing bits of ware that weren't up to the standard of Wedgwood. Now, it might all be kind of, made up, but there is this idea of this kind of ball of energy alongside this disability, which is never there in the portraits of him. And in a sense, it didn't get in his way. And he joked. He lost his leg on the 31st of May, 1768, which was also my birthday, which was known as St. Amputation Day. And they all joked about that. And so every year on 31st of May, they would celebrate St. Amputation Day as this moment in his life.
Tristram, the two men, Bentley and Wedgwood, you've mentioned their personal friendship, you've mentioned their business relationship. They also shared ideas.
They were both nonconformists, and in a sense I would describe their politics as radical patriotism. They had a great love of country, but they also felt the country was going in the wrong direction, as we would say now. And they blamed the government, and they blamed the ministers, and they blamed the courtiers around the king. And they strongly believed in the importance of democracy, of growing democracy. So they were both instinctive supporters of the American Revolution, because they regarded the American Revolution not as some act of rebellion and resistance, but the proper struggle for Magna Carta rights and liberty and freedom under law that should have been happening in Great Britain. And Wedgwood even makes these secret symbols of the rattlesnake, which was the symbol of resistance for some of the armies in America against British troops. And they're making them here in Stoke. Meanwhile, everyone in Stoke-on-Trent, to Wedgwood's fury, is supporting the British against the Americans.
And slavery, they agreed on that.
Very much so. Bentley is based originally in Liverpool. He makes his money in Liverpool and the wealth of Liverpool is up to its neck in slavery. Yet he is an abolitionist. He believes in ending slavery. Wedgwood comes to this later, but when he does come to it, he does what he does best, which was to create a visual identity around the cause of freeing enslaved Africans. And so he works with a committee for the abolition of the slave trade to create what's called the Emancipation Badge, which is this beautiful black and white jasper ware medallion of an enslaved African with the phrase, "Am I not a man and a brother?" This great evangelical cry making the case for abolishing slavery. And it is a supremely important piece of what we would today call virtue signalling, and people are signalling their virtuous resistance to slavery.
I've got a photograph of it in front of me. It is very moving. It is a black man on his knees in chains, and as you say, am I not a man and a brother?
There's this lovely account from the great abolitionist Thomas Clarkson, who says that fashion, which was previously regarded as a rather flippant component of life, became now this great cause for liberty and freedom because everyone would want to wear these badges.
A bit like those T-shirts saying this is what a feminist looks like.
This is,
the
CND badge or the Extinction
and it still echoes today, Tristram. Back in the day, Wedgwood had shops on all the military bases, and the American infantry is predominantly black. And they loved Wedgwood. They were big supporters even to this day. And that medallion was mentioned to me more than once, because I used to go around giving lectures at the military bases. So the echoes that go right through to, I would suggest, still to this very day.
The business remained in the family until 1895, and in 1920 Wedgwood expanded to America, while in Britain the directors decided to build a new factory in Barlaston, some 6 miles south of Etruria, where a village for its workers was also built. Boasting an improvement that would have made Josiah proud, it was the first pottery to power their kilns by electricity, thus creating a healthier environment for the workers. In the 1960s, the original factory was bulldozed to the ground. If one pulls back the branches of an overgrown shrub on the east side of the canal, a bent, rusted metal sign can be found, which states that this was once the spot of the famous Etruria factory.
The reason it failed, why did it fail? We took great skills that we got in Stoke-on-Trent, great machinery, and we packed it all up and shipped it off to, in Dalton's case, Indonesia, and built 2 very, very modern factories there, which was disappointing because my understanding was that at that very time, Dalton could still make the cheapest bone china dinner plate in the world. So why do we have to go to China? But people tend to forget, and I suppose I see this more from the sales side, the retailers had changed. The Debenhams of this world, the British Home Stores, the Marks and Spencers, the manufacturers had discovered China, but the retailers had also discovered China. And off they went to buy direct. So the whole business was changing. At one time, we were the manufacturers, we supplied the retailers. That's how it got into the marketplace. But the retailers really cut out the manufacturer and went direct. And that was a big factor.
This was long after Josiah's death.
He died with the business doing incredibly well, but his sons never had the same level of commercial ambition. So the sons, who had this beautiful education in Edinburgh and elsewhere, never wanted to get their hands dirty to the same. They didn't have the commercial spirit.
Sometimes that happens, doesn't it? It doesn't.
The curse of family businesses.
The curse of family businesses, which is why my daughters are in online gambling and accountancy.
Josiah Wedgwood died in Etruria Hall, where we started this programme, in January 1795. As you put it, Tristram Hunt, a wealthy man looking out over a Great Britain utterly reshaped during his lifetime.
What I've always loved about Wedgwood is that from this very particular place in North Staffordshire, where the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, where horizons can sometimes be limited, actually his vision was totalising of himself and the potteries and the change that would come through his vision that still today we live with the ramifications of.
There are reminders of Wedgwood's importance all over Stoke. His statue is outside the main station, there's a tribute to him in Stoke Minster, and then there's this, the Wedgwood Institute here in Burslem, built long after his death by public subscription and opened by the Prime Minister, William Gladstone, in 1863. We're sitting opposite that institute now, and I'm looking at a grand building with friezes in bas relief of all the occupations of the people of Stoke, and standing, gracing it all above them, is a marvellous stone statue. But right next to him is some buddleia that's grown up out of the brickwork and weeds, and to each side there are buildings that were once fine buildings and now seem to have fallen into something close to ruin. What are your feelings as the biographer of Wedgwood when you look at this?
I mean, obviously this profound sense of loss when you look at the heroism on display in these extraordinary reliefs in this wonderful building that Gladstone himself opened as a celebration of Wedgwood's contribution to the world, and this fear that what Stoke-on-Trent has been through over the last 20 years in terms of globalisation, how it can emerge from that, and yet hopefully just a scintilla of hope, because behind us on the other side is the Art College. In there today are the young designers and artists and creatives who are going to be another Wedgwood in the future and hopefully transform the pottery industry into the next stage.
My thanks to Tristram Hunt and also to Norman Tempest of Royal Stafford and to all the other contributors in this programme. Goodbye.
Hey, this is Trevor Shand from Bloody Disgusting's Boo Crew podcast. There's a streaming service that has undeniably changed our lives as horror fans. It's called Shudder. It's got an unbeatable selection of everything in the genre, from thrillers to the supernatural, Hollywood favorites, cult classics, and exclusives from the most exciting and adventurous creators in the space that you're not going to find anywhere else. It's uncut, commercial-free. We have discovered so many of what have become our all-time favorites on Shudder. Psycho Gorman, original series like the legendary Greg Nicotero's Creepshow. Sign up at Shudder.com.